Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and we're talking about beer and food with Mirella Amato, the celebrated beer instructor and educator who has a new course available about creating memorable pairings. But first up, this episode is brought to you by the World Beer Awards. I'm honored to serve as a co-chair of judges for the U.S. portion this year, and we're bringing experienced, fair-minded, and engaged judges to Washington, D.C. later on this summer to blind taste test beers and to hand out medals. The World Beer Awards ensures that each beer is judged both rigorously and fairly to give its best chance in the competition. If you're a professional brewer, learn more about the competition and categories and sign up to enter at worldbeerawards.com. Early bird discount rates are available through April 1st, 2022. Again, check out worldbeerawards.com to learn more and to sign up. Also, a reminder to visit beeredge.com, where you can sign up for the newsletter, catch up with the Beer Edge podcast, and check out the merch page, which is filled with This Week in Rauk Beer gear, as well as Defend Pilsner mugs. It's great fun to have Mirella Amato on the show this week. I've had the good pleasure of knowing her for years, and I've enjoyed her writings and keen insight into the proper way to pair beer and food. Amato is a master Cicerone, as well as a Domains beer sommelier. She is the author of Beerology, Everything You Need to Know to Enjoy Beer Even More, which is available where books are sold. And recently, the sensory and craft beer consultant launched a new online course through her website, beerology.ca. It's called Mastering Beer and Food Pairing. And we're going to talk about that, along with opera, current trends and tastes, and finding the right beer to match a mood. She spoke to me from Toronto. Here's our conversation. Do you have a memory of early on being a beer drinker and having a beer and food experience that unlocked this creativity, that unlocked this passion that led you to where you are today?
So the way I got into beer, I think, is a bit unusual for someone of my time in North America. And I have to share that in order to provide a little context for my answer. But the way that I was introduced to beer was through craft beer. So my early experiences with beer were that beer has many different flavors and colors, and just naturally I would order different beers when I was, at least certainly when I was eating, than when I was not eating. I can't distinctly remember all those years ago how specific I was with my beer and food pairing, but I do remember in those early days being so confused that other people were just drinking the same beer by the pitcher all night, and that, they weren't thinking at all about what mood they were in or what they were eating. So I feel like even though it was probably not it probably likely wasn't a honed skill back in the day, I definitely have, I think it would be fair to say, I have always paid attention to what I was eating, what my mood was, et cetera, when choosing my beer. So for that reason, I can't really say there was an aha moment. It was rather the opposite, looking around and thinking, why are these people always drinking the same beer all the time? And it's actually that realization and that impetus to share this idea that there's a beer for every food, every mood, and every occasion. That's really what got me into beer in the first place. And in those early days, I didn't know I was going to make a career out of it. I thought I was, maybe going to find some way to express that passion. But that really was my journey. I think it would be fair to say that, I've always had some instinct in that direction. And then obviously over the years, I've honed my abilities.
I'd like to ask you about mood, because that's one of those, it's a word that I don't hear often enough when it comes to speaking about beer choice? I know we think of comfort food and we think of, people will say for a meal all the time, well, what are you in the mood for? And we think about our food very consciously that way. But I don't know if that conversation comes up enough with beer. Or I mean, maybe just not in my circles, but how do you approach that? How do you try to zero in on what the mood calls for beer wise?
I think for myself, it's something that I observed, right? So it's not a conscious thing. It's not a conscious set of thoughts like, oh, I am feeling this way. What beer might match my current mood? It's more, it's more a situation of opening the fridge and nothing that's in there is going to work in the current moment. And that's because, I'm upset and I need something roasty, or because I've had I'm really excited and I need something that's just bursting with bright hop flavors. So I think it's something that I maybe talk about more because it's something that I observed in my relationship with beer.
Yeah.
From there, though, I have, certainly thought about it more. And in my book, I touch on it. I'll just say my little plug, my award-winning book, Beerology, everything you need to know to enjoy beer even more. Anyway, in the book, with my styles, I do provide a food pairing recommendation for each. And I also provide just a playful example of a mood, because it's something that I've definitely, or an occasion rather than a mood. And because it's something that I've thought a lot about. And so I have applied it in various contexts. I applied it in my book. I also I ran an event for a number of years called Hopera, which was pairing beer with opera. So I had some singers come into a bar and they sang live operatic excerpts, arias or duets or ensemble numbers. And with each, I paired a beer. And that was very much mood based. So, I would say, generally speaking, so based on that experience doing those pairings, I've had time to examine a little bit more the process. And for me, certainly like a more mellow mood calls for hops and calls for it's the more specifically, sorry, did I say hops?
Yes.
I did. I meant malt.
Okay.
Slip of the tongue. For the sweeter caramel notes or even toasted notes, and sometimes getting into the chocolate and coffee. These are all, to me, very sort of soothing, mellow flavors, whereas the flavors of hops, or the bright acidity of a sour beer, that's more of an upbeat, it's a brighter flavor. To borrow a term from Garrett Oliver, right? He talks about bright and dark flavors.
Yeah.
So that's, how I approach it. And then I also, when I was certainly doing the aria and food pairings, I also would look at, just the weight of the text, was it very serious text that needed to be pondered? In which case, we need to go for a more of a slow sipper. Is it really fast and high paced and a lot going on? Then, maybe that IPA is still too heavy. I need to go with something very light and effervescent, just a light lager or something. So I hope that gives you some insights into the thought process.
I'm fascinated by that event. Because I hadn't really thought about the two worlds intersecting. What did you learn pairing beer and opera after it was all over? Like what were you left with as far as lessons learned?
For me, the goal of that event was to introduce people to new things. And, what I guess the lesson learned is you can convince people to try pretty much anything if beer is involved. I was right, which I think is fair to say. And so I'm very passionate about opera. I'm very passionate about beer. And I thought it would be really cool to create this event and hopefully bring in people who loved opera and, didn't know a lot about beer, and teach them something about beer, because with every pairing, I would go up and speak to the beer, and I had a musical director who would speak to the piece. And then also bring in beer people who would never otherwise probably try opera, but who, trusted me and were curious. And I think the most interesting thing for me in that event was realizing, even for people who love opera, I don't know if you're an opera goer, but it is extremely rare to have the opportunity to hear an opera singer like at a 5-10 foot range, right? To have them that close.
Yeah, you think of the
such
stage
a
of the
small
Met or
space.
Yeah, but
it's unusual. And I will never forget never in my life. And I've conducted many, many beer tastings. Never in my life have I had to remind people to drink the beer, because the first time that those singers opened their mouths and people had their beer in their hand, it was so powerful to them. I mean, if you hear opera that close, your chest vibrates, right?
Yeah.
And that's something I'm used to. I've been in many rehearsal spaces with opera singers. It's nothing to me, but I didn't realize what a powerful experience it would be. And everyone just stood there, just still taking in this opera with their beer in the hand. And the whole idea was to pair the two. So I had to, after the piece, gently remind everyone that to drink.
That's incredible. Is that something that you can, I know the pandemic is not over, but the world seems to be moving on. Is that something that you think you can do again, that you would do again?
I would very much love to. We ran 4 editions of it for 4 years as part of Toronto Beer Week. It was a Toronto Beer Week event. And the issue is that it is an expensive event to run, because I believe in paying musicians.
Sure.
So, as I'm sure you can imagine, hiring 3 or 4 opera singers and a pianist and a musical director, plus the cost of the beer and some snacks and the space, it's a very expensive event to run. So, if I can find sponsorship again, I think I most certainly will. We certainly have diehard fans out there, the people who attended the event in the past and just kept bringing more and more people every year. So I do hope to run it again, because it was a wonderful event.
It sounds incredible. To the conversation of food, there are so many different schools of thoughts that are out there when it comes to what's on a plate, what's in a glass. You've developed, one, this course, but 2, the educational background over many years of doing this. I imagine there's not an easy answer to this, but where do you start when thinking about pairing beer and food?
In terms of the theory, or in terms of if I'm actually approaching a beer and food pairing?
See, that's it. There's no easy. I mean, we can start theoretical and then go down to practical.
Sure. Well, putting together this course was definitely a big challenge. And I think having gone through the process, it really made it clear to me why there aren't more beer and food pairing courses out there. It is certainly a very difficult area to tackle. And, for me, what I really wanted to do was create a course that was practical, because a lot of the beer and food pairing resources out there are either lists of pairings. So, this beer goes well with that food, and this beer goes well with that food, and this beer goes well with that food. And from there, I guess the idea is if you taste enough of those combinations, you'll be able to then extrapolate other pairings. Or the other approach is a long set of rules and guidelines, taste interactions, like columns, the 3 C's, whatnot. So many different theories out there.
For those unfamiliar, the 3 C's are
cut, complement, and contrast. So those were historically approached as 3 different types of pairings. So you could have a pairing where the beer would cut through the food. So something with like a high acidity or a high carbonation, for example, with a very rich food. Then there would be a complement pairing, with the idea being there that you would be looking for a pairing where the food flavors would complement the beer flavors. And then a contrast pairing is the idea that you can also have a good pairing where things are opposites. So something like a light lager and a burger, for example, something like that, or a light lager, let's say with a spicy food, where, that contrast is really what is creating the pairing. But that's an oversimplification. And I do have a little YouTube rant about the 3 C's, because I believe that they are useful, but they need to be used together and not as 3 separate case studies. So the challenge that I gave myself with this course, which was a huge challenge, and as you mentioned, the where do you start piece is, how do I take all of this information and turn it into a step, like you have a beer in front of you. This is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3 to get you to your food, or you have your food in front of you, and this is step 1, step 2, step 3 to get you to your beer. And so do you do a lot of beer and food pairing, John?
I've dabbled.
And what's your approach?
Oh, I have no approach.
Right.
That's not true. I try to find the flavor bridges. I try to find, I like contrast, a little bit, but I tend a little bit more towards complement, or finding, an ingredient in the beer that will really bring out something new in the food. So I typically start with the beer itself, and then try to find a dish around it, or an ingredient, and then try to build a dish out from there.
Oh, that's interesting. Cool. So what happens if you have the dish and you need to pick the beer?
Same thing. I try to find one thing in the dish that is typically not the main ingredient, or not the main spice, or not the main flavoring, something that sort of plays around in the background. Because if you can do it the right way, I found that the beer will bring that up a little bit more, that ingredient that had been in the background up a little bit more. And that to me is a bit more of a delight, as opposed to just some of these, blunt instrument pairings where it's going to be a slam dunk because a chocolate stout's going to go really well with vanilla ice cream, like that kind of like that. It's been done. It's still delicious, but it's kind of boring, especially given how vibrant beer culture is and food culture these days. So I typically try to find something that is playing in the background of a dish, and find a way to help the beer elevate that, because then it changes everything.
So that's fantastic. I would hazard a guess that around that conscious decision to pick that one note, there's also a lot of sort of instinctive other decisions that you're making in terms of knowing, for example, if it's you want to tie it in with like a chocolate note in a beer, the decisions that are leading you towards a Schwarzbier versus a stout versus a porter versus an imperial stout versus a peanut butter marshmallow stout.
I mean, that's pretty much all I'm drinking these days is the peanut butter marshmallow stouts. But yeah,
of course, aren't we all?
Yeah. Goes really well with lobster.
Interesting.
No, it does. No, stop. I'm sorry. My brand of New Jersey sarcasm is not playing well in the great Canadian North. No, I've never actually tried it. I've never actually tried it, but now, yeah.
But Dogfish had made a chocolate lobster beer.
Yeah, Chuck Lobster, right? Yeah. And that was the and it had was that the one that had diacetyl on purpose, or so they said. So it had some of those buttery notes.
Ooh, I missed that detail.
I want to say somebody did that at some point. I know Randy Mosher.
It doesn't sound like that beer, but
somebody did that for a lobster beer or a beer to pair with lobster. And then I know Randy Mosher years ago had a beer that he had brewed with cherry pits that had diacetyl coming off of it. And he says that he did it so that it would taste like a cherry cheese Danish. And it worked. The diacetyl worked in there to bring that buttery flavor to the forefront, or not totally to the forefront, just 3 feet away from the tip of the stage. But it was enough to be noticeable, but he had to explain it. And once he did, it made sense. Otherwise, it would be like, oh, I think your beer might be off a little bit here. But when it became an attribute.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I haven't had either of these beers that we're talking about with a purposeful diacetyl, but I will say that I think diacetyl has been unnecessarily completely vilified, and we've somehow gotten to this, and this is not recent.
Make your case.
This is a development of the past 10 years where even just a hint of diacetyl has everyone freaking out. And diacetyl can be just a lovely, lovely piece of the puzzle. If it's there at a low level, it can't be huge, but this unfortunate reaction that has developed where any hint of diacetyl is considered a fault it's not doing beer any favors, and it's not good. There are many styles that benefit from just a little touch of diacetyl, and so good for Randy for doing that. That's fantastic, and I do hope that he opened a few people's minds, and I hope that people, I hope there'll be a swing back, because it's not necessary to freak out for just a little touch of diacetyl.
I might need a bit more convincing on that, especially on certain styles. Like I don't want it in my lagers, or
of course, no, it has no place in lagers. No, obviously.
Okay.
It's where appropriate, but right now, even in styles where it is appropriate, generally brewers won't allow for even a hint of diacetyl because people will freak out.
What do you make? Yeah. No. I don't. I think if it is purposeful and it can be an attribute, then yes.
And it has to be at a very low level. It can't, it should not dominate in any way, but it can be just a lovely piece of that puzzle in certain styles, namely in a number of English styles. And you're what are they calling Czech Pilsners these days? Premium something.
What premium?
Premium what? Czech lager. I think the BJCP has renamed Bohemian Pilsners.
Okay.
I think it's called Czech Premium Pale Lager.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
I have admittedly not looked through the BJCP guidelines recently, but it sounds like I should.
I think this is two iterations back, my friend.
Okay. Well, then I really haven't looked at them in a really long time.
But yeah. Anyway, so back to food pairing. So what I was getting at earlier is that there's, for those of us who do beer and food pairing, the way most of us have gotten to our process is by reading a number of different resources and then, trying a bunch of different things. And so another big challenge for me in putting together this course, again, in answer to your question, where do you begin, is untangling, like, what is the process that is going on in my head because at this stage, if you give me a beer, I have to think about it for a bit, but I'll come up with a food for it, and vice versa. But it's not it wasn't previously a very sort of structured, deliberate thought process. It was very much instinctive. And so the really cool journey for me was to really take a step back and figure out, what pieces of theory are out there that I'm actually using? Is there anything else that I'm doing that's different? And how do we piece that together into an actual how-to?
So the how-to part, I think, is interesting, right? Because one of the pet peeves that I have are, and I think this is dying at this point, but there are still people out there who are like of the school of thought of red meat goes with red wine and white wine goes with chicken and fish, which is just such bullshit on so many levels. But
it's an oversimplification.
Exactly. Yes. Have people tried to box you in with something similar to beer?
Well, I certainly, when I was studying beer and food pairing a good number of years ago, I was taught ales with red meat and lagers with white meat and fish.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't think I've ever heard somebody say that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't know if I agree with that. That also completely flies in the face of the old ads for a burger and a bud.
Yeah. And it's in retrospect, I know a lot more now than I did then, but in retrospect, when I was being taught this about beer, it was already being questioned in the world of wine. So there was absolutely no reason. A lot of our, the 3 C's, for example, I'm pretty convinced were somehow at least partially borrowed from the world of wine, because wine pairing has been around for a lot longer than the deliberate wine pairing has been around a lot longer than the idea of deliberate beer and food pairing.
Yeah.
Beyond the obvious, German, Weissbier, Weisswurst, and the, Belgians, countries where it's been a part of, how they operate for years. The idea of, just putting together theory and figuring out how it works, it's more recent than it was in the world of wine. So we borrowed a lot from wine, but yeah, at that stage, what I was being taught was not, that's just lazy. That's like people who are still teaching the tongue map now. That was debunked before I was born. So,
but it's still out there, and it still shows up in texts, and I see it on brewery walls sometimes. And I'm always, it's like that and the Ben Franklin quote.
Yes,
it's not actually what Ben Franklin said. I don't want to give too much away about the course because I want people to go to beerology.ca, right? I got that right.
Yes.
To sign up for the course. But
the course is actually at beerology.thinkific.com. But if they go to my website, which is beerology.ca, they can get to it.
Yes, that's what I wanted to make it as simple as possible. But yes, one more time, the link.
Beerology.thinkific.com.
Thinkific. Okay.
Yes.
IFIC. Okay. For people, though, listeners who have a fridge full of beer, have an interest in cooking or making something, can we do a sort of a mini lightning round, if you'll allow, for some popular beer styles that are out there these days, and what might go well with those beers?
Yeah, let's try it.
Excuse me. All right. Hazy IPA.
Hazy IPA. All right. So that's a beer that has a very strong fruit character, hopefully. And not very bitter in terms of isohumulones, but there's a high potential for tannins there. So with tannins, you want to be careful not to get into foods that are too bitter or too spicy. Are we talking main course here or just like anything?
You're the professor. You are our Sherpa today. Take us where you will.
Yeah, with a hazy IPA, I'd be very interested to do pasta with an Alfredo type sauce. So what I'm thinking is that there'll be a lovely contrast between, the bright notes in the beer and the creaminess of in the sauce, which will also be offset by, any tannins that might be in the beer. Hopefully, a lot of hazy IPA is, a difficult style to comment on because there is such a range in how they are brewed. But, if I think about it, a cream sauce on a pasta is often also very nice with some lemon or citrus. So I feel like the intensities there are pretty well matched, and that could be pretty tasty.
Well, see, now I want to give that a try. Kettle sour.
I'm going to need a bit more description. Something like a Berliner Weiss.
Yeah, let's go with a non-fruited Berliner Weiss.
A non-fruited.
Yeah, I mean a traditional
Weiss.
Berliner Weiss. I mean these days, everything has fruit puree in there. So I feel like if I named a fruit, that would be fairly easy. So let's just go straight up Berliner.
Let's keep it simple. So that's so you asked earlier, where do you start with beer and food pairing? And the one place I always start is intensity. So a Berliner Weiss is a fairly low intensity beer. It does have some intensity from the acidity, hopefully, if it's brewed to style, but it's very light. It's very effervescent. So, so my mind is going towards a lighter food. And with that acidity, you don't want anything that is too sweet food-wise, because a sweet food will just amplify that acidity and annihilate the beer. My mind is going towards some kind of chicken quesadilla. I think would be really lovely with a little bit of guac in there, which I know is not traditional. So, or maybe put it on the side, but yeah.
Or in the Berliner. Really nice.
True.
Yeah.
Guac in the Berliner? No. Hold on. You almost got me there.
Okay. We're getting dangerously close to April Fools. And
I'm not saying no flavor wise. I think it would be delightful. I'm saying no because the landmark of the Berliner Weiss is its effervescence, and avocado, of course, is fatty. So that'll knock the carbonation out. Then you'll end up with a flat Berliner Weiss, and that's nobody's friend.
I love how seriously you're taking me, and it's so refreshing for this show. All right, I have two more beer styles. Rauch beer.
Oh, well, I mean, when I had Rauch beer in Bamberg, one of the things I had it with, well, I don't know if you've had this. I'm trying to remember exactly the details, but it was like a stuffed onion baked in the oven.
Oh yeah, the Bamberg onion. Yeah.
Can you remind me what's in that onion?
Probably. Let's see. The Bamberg stuffed onion. It's usually pork or sausage, and then it has spices like oregano, parsley, mace.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple.
Anyway, that's the first place my mind went. But taking a step back, because most people don't have a Bamberg onion takeout option.
That's too bad.
Local to them. With Rauch beer,
there's an idea for a food truck, by the way, is just an all Bamberg onion food truck.
Oh yes. Oh, and then it can go like the way of the poutine, and they can make different kinds of Bamberg onions with different types of stuffing. And I like this idea is going to make us tens of dollars.
I love it.
I think it will. Yeah. Tens of Canadian dollars.
Well, I'm out.
Anyway, so the route, when we talk about Rauch beer, I'm assuming you're talking about the Märzen style with
let's go with
the
that.
smoked.
Yeah.
So with the Märzen, there's that slight underlying sweetness, which, obviously they weren't messing around in Bamberg. It calls for pork. Any kind of pork sausage, I think, would be absolutely lovely. Again, to your earlier point about, cheats, I would not go with a smoked food with a smoked beer. Like, what is the point? That's not, that's too much sameness. But think of any food that you would enjoy a hint of smoke on, and then have that, even like just a nice cheddar with a Rauch beer would be nice, or any kind of cheese that you could imagine also having smoked. No. Now I'm making myself hungry. I know, usually have that effect on other people.
No, I know. I'm into it now. All right, last one. A cola flavored hard seltzer.
Okay, well, I am going to not answer that question because seltzer is not a beer.
All right, that's fine. I was teasing anyway.
It was exhausting enough having to explain to people that cider is not a beer, having to also now explain that seltzer. I don't know what's going on. But this course is on pairing beer with food.
That was mean. That was mean. And I was really just sort of looking around as to what I had on my desk right now. And unfortunately, I have one of those.
You have, You're revealing a lot there, John. Is that your beverage of choice?
It's all for work purposes. It's,
likely story.
Yeah.
Okay. We now
many
know
brain cells were harmed
drink
during the writing of that article. But here's, in all seriousness though, because I was sort of talking about beers that have trends, Rauch beer side, but in Berliners or Kettle sours, or if having hazy IPAs, and there's a lot of barrel aged beers that are getting out there. Sometimes they're fresh oak. Sometimes they've had spirits in them. Sometimes they're fooders that have either are being used fresh or have gone wild. But wood, it's been explained to me by a lot of brewers, is really a fifth ingredient in a lot of these barrel aged beers or wood aged beers. Do you think about that? Have you thought about how wood tannins, how barrel character should be thought about with food?
Absolutely.
Pairings?
Yeah. And that's one of the bigger pieces of research that I did with this course, because one of the things that we consider in pairing beer with food, I'm sure you're aware, is taste interactions. So the whole idea of, as I mentioned earlier, if the food is very sweet and your beer is not very sweet, then, after having a bite of the food, you taste the beer, the sweetness is going to completely distort the flavors of the beer. So that's called a taste interaction between the tastes in the beer. So sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, and the tastes in the food, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. And it occurred to me as I was putting together the course and looking at the bitterness piece, that bitterness in beer can be derived from a number of places, but most notably, I would say the isohumulones, so the bittering compounds in the hops. Then there's tannins, and tannins can come from barrel aging for sure, but it can also come from grains, of course. It can come from hops, and it can come also from the use of spices. I would say would you say that's fair to say those are the four most common sources of yes, I think that's it. And then the third place that bitterness can come from, of course, is bitter compounds from roasted grains. And the thing is, it's all very challenging because very little scientific research has gone into most of these interactions, with the exception of tannins, because tannins are a problem in wine, and wine has been throwing a lot of money into research. But, they're very different compounds. So they're going to react differently because the way that our body perceives bitterness is a specific process that depends on the compounds at hand. So one of the things that I did a lot of testing and research on, and that I'm going to continue to hone and fine tune is, the taste interactions with those three different types of bitterness. And sometimes they're the same and sometimes there's nuances. So yes, I have put some thought into that. And, at the end of the day, when you're pairing beer with food, you have to work from a specific beer, which is why earlier when you were throwing these styles at me, I had to sort of zero in a little better, for example, that Rauch beer, there could have been a Rauchweiss and it could be, or what kind of kettle sour it was, you have to work from a specific beer. And your first step is breaking down that beer into all of its components. So if you're doing that, it doesn't matter if the beer is barrel aged or if it's not, or, what's going on, because whatever is there is what you work with. So yes, barrel aging is definitely a piece of that, but I would say, more so that the tannins, that can, because I've noticed even in beers with, just a slight barrel aging character, those tannins they're quite notable. You notice them, they're there. So I think that's the most important piece there with the food pairing. But of course, if you're getting some lovely notes, and especially if the barrel aging is in a barrel that previously housed another spirit or wine and is giving distinct flavors, and you obviously want to work with those flavors as well.
I was having a conversation with Pete Schlossberg not too long ago about chocolate pairings with beer.
Ah, yes.
And
how long has he been doing that now?
Oh, I mean, I think since Pete's Wicked went the way of the dinosaur, but so it's been quite some time. But he mentioned to me that one of his frustrations is when people are doing beer and chocolate tastings is that they don't let the chocolate melt first. And he's a huge advocate of taking a bite of chocolate and letting it melt on your tongue for a good few seconds, if not longer, to really let the chocolate release and express itself a little bit, and then add the beer to your mouth so that you can taste the two together. When somebody is doing, a dinner pairing with beer, is it take a bite, take a sip, take a sip, take a bite? Is it both at the same time? What have you learned that works, or what do you advocate for?
I think it's more a question of advocacy than what works. And okay. I would hazard that this melt the chocolate in your mouth approach is a way to sell that chocolate. It's a way to, it's a way to have people really appreciate the flavor in the chocolate.
Yes.
Right. And to think about the flavors in that chocolate, and so for me, and this is actually a question that's come up quite often. Someone just asked me in one of the participants in my course just asked me, and my approach for food pairing for a meal is not to have any rules and to taste it in every which fashion, food first, beer first, together in the mouth, because at the end of the day, that's how people eat. And it seems very silly to me to be presenting beer and food pairings. Beer and chocolate is different because it's very precise, or, beer and cheese, it's like a very small, everyone's tasting at the same time situation. But if you're doing a meal, you present the pairing and then you let people enjoy, and you certainly don't want to be telling them, okay, have a sip of beer, then have a bite of your food, and then wait, and then have a sip of your beer. Like, no one's going to do that, or vice versa, right? So when it comes to food pairing and enjoying a beer and a food together, I think I advocate for not fussing too much. This being said, in my work, if I'm looking for a pairing, what I will very deliberately taste the beer first and then the food and see what that interaction is. And then I'll clean my palate and taste the food first and then taste the beer and see what that interaction is. I used to also taste them together in my mouth, and I'll still on occasion do that just for curiosity. But what I have come to learn with time is that if the interaction works well from beer to food and it works well from food to beer, it'll also work well in the mouth. So there's there's no really reason to be concerned about that. Which is interesting. I'm going to go on a tiny little tangent here, but
please,
because I've also been doing, I have been. It's been a couple of years now. I did a lot of work with spirit and beer pairings, and was really fascinated to learn that with spirit and beer pairings, it is very possible to taste a spirit first and then the beer, and it tastes horrible, and then taste the beer first and then taste the spirit, and it's horrible, but then blend the two together, and that's delicious.
Huh.
Or vice versa.
Yeah.
Blend them together and it's horrible, but one after the other tastes great. So that is really interesting to me, and something that, maybe, when I retire, I'll open a lab and research, put some scientific research into everything that's going on there. Cause it's, sensory science is so fascinating and so under-researched, but that whole thing really threw me for, I don't know if you've ever experienced that or tried that. But that sort of uncanny disjoint does not, in my experience, happen with beer and food pairing is what I was getting at.
Okay. Is there a pairing that you think people go to the well too often on that should be retired?
Yeah, what, chocolate beer and chocolate cake.
Okay.
I mean, I don't believe any pairing should be retired. I believe that, learning to pair beer with food is a process. And if you're at the beginnings of that process, you should go with something that's tried and true, of course. But yeah, I think like any samey, exact same pairing, it's just, things can be so much more dynamic than that. And that's also something I cover in the advanced techniques of my course, but certainly in the early, maybe I should talk you through sort of how the content works.
Okay, sure.
In the course. So the course is divided into 5 sections. The first one is beer and food traits. So obviously, as I was mentioning earlier, if you want to pair beer with a food or food with a beer, it's about finding traits in the food that work well with the traits in the beer, or that won't clash. So the first step is being able to break down all of the traits and identify the traits in either. So the first section is just about that, and sort of establishing the framework and the vocabulary, to then move forward into the second section, which is pairing basics. And pairing basics is all of the rules that we've all heard about, matching intensity, bridging flavors, as you talked about earlier, taste interactions that I was talking about. So all of the different guidelines that need to be followed. And then section 3 is pairings in practice. So starting with the beer, what are all the steps to find your food pairing? And then starting with your food, what are all the steps to find your beer, as well as planning a dinner. So for example, if you're pairing one beer with one food, there are certain considerations, but if you have 2 or 3 courses back to back, there are added considerations that you have to think about. And in that section, I also have a lesson that I think will be more useful to some than to others, but I felt was really important to share since I have a lot of experience in this area, and that's how to host a beer dinner and sort of the logistics of doing that. But so by section 3, you have all of the information that you need to put together a good pairing. And I would hazard that by section 3, you might be at the stage where you might want to pair a chocolate cake with a chocolate beer, to see how it works, and then venture out from there. So that's the first 3 sections. And then section 4 gets into advanced techniques. So anyone who's new to food pairing, I suggest taking a couple of weeks to practice the basics before getting into advanced techniques. But to people who are well-versed in food pairing, section 1 and 2 will be, probably like 70% review and with a few new ideas. And then getting into section 3 will be new. And then section 4 is really where it gets fun. All these little advanced techniques, like how to use texture, how to add tension, how to think about the pairing dynamics, that sort of thing. And then, so this is where we're definitely moving away from the chocolate cake and the chocolate beer and finding ways to make pairings interesting and dynamic. And then section 5 is just presentation. So all of the little details you have to think about to make sure that your pairing is presented in the best light, including, how to describe the pairing to the customer, because this course was originally, really conceived with people who work in beer in mind, to help them out. But I found a large number of people from all kinds of walks of life are taking it. So that's pretty cool.
I love it. And that's 5. Yes.
Yes, that's 5.
And I'll remind everybody that it is beerology.thinkific.com to go check out, or they can just go to your website at beerology.ca and can also get this information. Sign up for the course. It's great. Can I ask you one last question?
Sure.
With the premise being last summer, my wife and I rewatched The Good Place, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with that show, but
yeah, I did. I think I watched season 1 and 2.
Okay.
Or maybe 1.5.
Okay.
So yes, I'm familiar with it.
It gets better. And towards the end, there is a concept of a green door, and you can walk through a green door and be any place at any point in history with whoever you want to be with. And so if such a door existed on this plane of existence and you could finish this conversation and walk through a green door, where would you want to be? Like, what pub or brewery or restaurant would you like to be at? What would you like in your glass? And who would you like to be with?
I'm going to stick to a beer theme here because I have many ideas. But I would say, something that's on it's been on my bucket list since I wrote my book and I found out about it. And so where I would want to be is on the north, I believe it's the north coast of the Flanders region on the ocean, where apparently they drink Flanders red ale with brown shrimp, which is a native shrimp in that area.
Yeah.
And have you tried that combination?
I have not. I've
okay.
heard people speak about it in auspicious tones.
It just sounds super exciting to me. And, the person that, I'm very sad that I never got to meet, that I would love to have with me, and he's certainly on our minds these days, is Michael Jackson. I think I started in beer a few months before he passed. And so yeah, I feel like that would just be a lovely place to be and a lovely experience to have and to share with him.
I love that. That's very, very nice to hear. And I will once again remind people to go to beerology.thinkific.com to sign up for your course. There's even a badge available that people can get now.
Yes, which is it's an accreditation, which is wonderful.
Yeah,
very excited.
Congratulations on this, and I hope you're going to be successful and educate a lot of folks and change a lot of minds and make a lot of hearts and stomachs full. So thank you for doing this hard and necessary work for the betterment of beer. I appreciate it and appreciate you being on the show this week.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. And, as for the course, I'm just delighted to put it out there, excited to see how well it's being received. I have tons of testimonials on the site, which is lovely, and hope to get more and more people enrolled, because I really believe that pairing beer with food is the next step for us. We've gotten to a stage now where craft beer and flavorful beer is everywhere. So we've won that fight. It is no longer relegated to, our the beer geek establishments. And so the next step is really to use those beers to their maximum potential and to create these wonderful experiences through food pairing.
What's the beer and food pairing that you adore, or that changed your perception of what beer and food can be together? Let me know. You can email me. It's John Hall, JOHNHOLL @beeredge.com, or you can get with me on Twitter @John_Hall. A reminder to check out beeredge.com for our This Week in Rauk Beer and Defend Pilsner merch, and you can follow along on social media at The Beer Edge. Of course, This Week in Rauk Beer is also online. The Facebook group is easy to search, and on Twitter and Instagram, it's at TW Rauk Beer. We're able to bring you this show each week thanks to the companies that want to support independent journalism in the beer space. If you'd like to learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates, please reach out to sponsor@beeredge.com. And speaking of that, this episode is brought to you by the World Beer Awards. I'm honored to serve as a co-chair of judges for the U.S. portion this year, and we're bringing experienced, fair-minded, and engaged judges to Washington, D.C. later on this summer to blind taste beers and to hand out medals. The World Beer Awards ensures that each beer is judged both rigorously and fairly to give its best chance in the competition. If you're a professional brewer, learn more about the competition and categories and sign up to enter at worldbeerawards.com. Early bird discount rates are available through April 1st, 2022. And again, check out worldbeerawards.com to learn more and to sign up. A reminder to check out the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes of the show release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.